House Bill 2164, authorizing persons who are 20 years of age or older to apply for certification as a police officer or law enforcement officer under the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Act. And with that, a bill brief from the reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2164 authorizes people who are 20 years of age and older to apply for certification as a law enforcement officer. The bill amends KSA 74-5605. This is the statute that provides for the qualifications of applicants to be a police officer or law enforcement officer under the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Act. Current law there requires that an applicant has to be at least 21 years of age. This bill would allow a person to apply for certification when they're 20 years of age or older, and then it would require that they turn 21 years of age prior to service as a full-time law enforcement officer or a police officer, or part-time for that matter. And I can take any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Not seeing any. Thanks very much. We will hear first from proponent conferee Chris Vallejo, Chief of Police, Topeka. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Vallejo. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Topeka. Good morning, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you for providing the opportunity for me to provide testimony on behalf of the City of Topeka. We're in strong support of House Bill 2164. We think it presents a meaningful step forward in addressing critical enforcement recruitment challenges while maintaining the highest standards of public safety and professional training. I'll go over a little bit of my written testimony that you have, and I do have City Attorney Amanda Stanley coming shortly to answer some follow-up questions should there be. Topeka, like many other municipalities, struggles to recruit and retain qualified law enforcement personnel. TPD has faced shortages as high as 15%. We're currently hovering about 11% right now, which impacts public safety and officer workloads. Competition, combined with competition from across the private sector and other states with lower age requirements for officers, is also a challenge. HB 2164 is a strategic solution, we feel. Currently, Kansas requires officers to be at least 21 years old at the time of employment. HB 2164 would lower that minimum age to 20. That would put Kansas more in line with states like Arkansas, California, and New York. This change allows young Kansas who want to serve their communities to start sooner, preventing talent loss to other states. We will also maintain the highest standards. The bill does not compromise the quality or preparedness of our officers. All recruits, regardless of age, must complete rigorous training at the KLET, Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. In this case, the Topeka Police Department provides even more extensive training at 23 weeks versus 14 weeks. I believe this will give us a competitive advantage for Kansas by lowering the age requirement, make it more competitive in attracting young, motivated recruits, and other states have successfully implemented similar policies while maintaining high training standards. In closing, we believe that HB 2164 is a proactive solution to the recruitment crisis without lowering professional standards. It strengthens public safety, enhances workforce retention, and ensures Kansas communities are served by high qualified officers. We urge the committee to support and advance HB 2164. At this point, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and hear from all the proponent conferees and take questions at the end if you're able to stay in the committee room until then.
Absolutely. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Amanda Stanley, City Attorney for the City of Topeka. And you don't look like Amanda, but go ahead.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the Capitol is very busy today, and Amanda has been trying to get on an elevator to get up. So perhaps if you have other proponents or the neutral testimony, she should be here momentarily.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dameron, for the heads up. Committee, why don't we go ahead with any questions that you may have for the chief? So do we have any questions for Mr. Vallejo, Chief of Police, Topeka? Yes, Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank you, Chris Vecchio. I know I butchered your name for coming here this morning. I'm looking at the bill brief and fiscal information. It says it's going to be a half a position at a cost of $20,000 for additional certification if the bill is enacted. If I'm understanding that right, they must think there's going to be quite a few more people coming in at the age of 20. Do you see it that way too?
This will be an experiment, definitely in the state of Kansas, but I think we would draw more interest at that age group. What I think it does is expands an opportunity for those, like in college, a bigger window to start applying or start thinking about applying at, closer to the age of 21 or somewhere between 20 and 21. It gives us more options to attract more candidates. But that's some data that we would definitely want to keep and start tracking if this resolution gets passed.
Do you, if I might add on to that, do you know of other right now that are 20 years old that are planning on applying? Do you have anybody in mind, or is there do you have applicants that are below that at this time? I'm just wondering how they came up with a half a position.
Yeah, we are anecdotally, I could tell you about applicants that would like to apply. Unfortunately, we don't keep robust data on that. Going forward, obviously, we will to substantiate the ask of passing HB 2164. But anecdotally, yes, but I don't have a data set to give you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Did you say that other states have this same age of 20 years old for this position?
Yes, that's Arkansas, California, and New York are among several. There could be plenty more. There are some states that have a lower age requirement, but this is kind of in line with what we're asking.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Chief Vallejo, for your testimony this morning. So just so I'm clear, I think as I read this, and tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but so you could have a recruit who's 20 years old enter the police academy, I guess, but he wouldn't be on the force until he met two requirements, I guess. One, he was 21 and he'd completed the training. Is that correct?
The training, as far as Topeka is concerned, is 23 weeks long. I can't speak to other agencies, but it's a minimum of 14 weeks. Also aligned with that is a probationary period. So in Topeka, that employee would be on probation for about 18 months and supervised from the point of hire to the academy to the writing period when they get on probation. So they'll be well past 21 when they reach a point where they can patrol in a car on their own.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Not seeing any, then I did see Ms. Stanley enter the committee meeting room. So if you want to come on up, Ms. Stanley, City Attorney, City of Topeka, please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Sorry, the red light means on. Amanda Stanley, City Attorney for Topeka. Thank you so much I apologize for being late. Apparently today was a day it would have been faster to do stairs on crutches than wait on an elevator around here. But it sounds like you heard from the chief on the reasoning for this bill. The reason I'm here today is we have had conversations with the Law Enforcement Training Center about how do we make this work with the language. We do have some proposed amendments in our testimony. One of the common concerns is that there's lots of statutes out there that allow you to have arrest powers and provisional license under your provisional license. And so what we thought might be the simplest solution is to change the definition of police officer to say that you are not considered a police officer until you hit 21, and then to remove the requirement that you have that provisional license. Also give KLTC time to do rules and regs to create a training license during this gap period. But we think that would be a simple solution to allow you to not have those powers of arrest until you hit the 21 stage. As the chief said, There are lots of states in his testimony. There are several states that have this type of law where you can enter the academy before you're 21, but then you have to be 21 before you actually hit the streets. There's also, like he said, ones that are younger, but it is not uncommon. And there's a list in his testimony of several states that are similar to this. We understand it's something new and different. We think there are ways to get here, and we really appreciate your looking at this bill and helping us find a way to increase our number of applicants and draw those in. And I am happy to stand for any questions about our proposed amendments.
Thank you. And if you want to stay right there, I'm going to ask, are there any other proponent conferees wishing to testify on the bill? Not seeing any, then that leaves questions for you, if there are any, which is why thank you for staying at the podium. Are there any questions for Ms. Stanley? Senator Argabright?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony, and thank you, Chief, for your testimony. I'm on page 2, line 14, number 6. Kind of a two-part question, but I think you could kind of mingle them a little bit together, and it has to do with an assessment of a candidate. The very last sentence says basically law enforcement officer with reasonable skill, safety, and judgment. So just from a public standpoint, peace of mind maybe, do you have data that says out of 100 applicants, 20 did not meet this requirement, that displays that the screening process does work? And the other piece of this is, we hear a lot about brain development research, which is 25, 26 years of age. And so how does that fit into determining a 20 or even a 21-year-old is ready to roll? And I am supportive of your efforts here. I just would like to hear some feedback on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
At the City of Topeka, we have a Civil Service Commission in our code that does have to sign off on all of our applicants before you get there. And as part of that process, it's a lot of steps. It's a psych evaluation. We have a psychologist that has to sign off on it. It's interviews with our command staff and training. Then they have to interview before our Civil Service Board, which is a group of community citizens that are made up of appointments by the mayor confirmed with the City Council that ask about those judgment and character issues. Ultimately, before anyone can be eligible for hire, the Civil Service Commission has to sign off on them, and they do have to make those findings that they show the reasonable judgment, that they've passed the psych eval, that they've passed the background check, that command staff didn't raise any command flags. I am sure we can historically go back through data. Not everyone makes that through the process. Some get screened out at the psych eval stage, some get screened out at civil service, some get screened out at command staff. But it is a very rigorous process before you get on our department, and that's for good reason. One, these are people that, you know, the community has to trust, and they have the powers of arrest. But also from a city side, right, like we don't want to hire someone that's going to put us in a liability issue or a legal issue, so we seriously vet these candidates to make sure. Ultimately, by the time someone would go onto the force, they're going to be 21, which is the current age now. The idea is getting them through the door sooner. We do have a longer academy. It's almost double the length of the academy in Hutchinson. So we can only run 2 academies a year versus if you are a city that sends people to Hutch, you can go on a regular basis. So there's probably not the same delay process that we have in Topeka because you have a longer wait period to get in the door because we can only run 2 academies a year because we do take those extra weeks and then we don't put them out on the street by themselves. Initially, they're with the training officer, so we have a pretty extensive time period to make sure that they do meet those qualifications.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? Well, I'm glad you anticipated some of the questions I had looking at the neutral conferee committee. It's not on our agenda, but we do have neutral in-person testimony. And I looked at the written that was provided, that it is at committee's desks, that there would be consequences in other statutes and regulatory changes that would need to be made. And one of the mentions was not just, you know, we would be giving arrest authority to persons under 21, But something in the neutral testimony says, and domestic violence laws. Is that
I did
a
read
different
that,
area?
in their email to us. I don't think that actually would be pulled into play if you take our suggested amendment, because that's reliant on the person being a police officer. If you define them as not a police officer until they hit 21, I think it takes a lot of those other statutes out of play that we wouldn't need to be concerned about them.
Great. Well, appreciate you working together with some of the concerns. Any other questions? Not seeing any, then thank you.
Thank you. And again, I apologize for being late.
It's no problem. It's a crowded day at the Capitol. It's a busy day, and we've got a full committee meeting room today, too. So welcome, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Are there any other, excuse me, we do also have proponent written testimony from John Goodyear, General Counsel, League of Kansas Municipalities, and Doreen Jokerst, Chief of Police, City of Overland Park. And with that, then, we will invite neutral conferee Doug Schroeder to provide testimony. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Thank you very much. Doug Schrader. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. We first learned of this bill as it was making its way through the House. The bill as written is potentially flawed. By statute, a person can't get into a basic training academy unless they have a provisional license. That provisional license starts the day of their hire. It gives them all the authority that an active law enforcement license would give them. So they can't start the academy by statute unless they have that provisional license. But the current statute says that they have to be 21 years of age to receive that. You had asked about the domestic violence. Should a 20-year-old receive a provisional license, domestic violence laws are written so that officers have to take action should they have probable cause in a domestic violence case. Would that apply to a 20-year-old if they're in training? If they have a provisional, yes. If they don't, maybe not. The crux of what I wanted to relay to this committee today is that the Kansas Commission is taking a neutral stance on this right now. The devil's in the details. We'll see what comes via an amendment. We would like to work with the proponents to find a way that a bill would not have us make other changes or complicate other areas of statute. The merits of whether a 20-year-old would be a good move statewide is something I think also needs to be discussed. There are 3 proponents representing this bill of 320 agencies in Kansas, so it's a very small sampling size. So just in summary, we believe this bill is flawed. We would like to see more time put into it. Again, we're certainly willing to work with the stakeholders. Other stakeholders that I would identify would be the Kansas Chiefs of Police Association, the Kansas Sheriff's Association, the Peace Officers Association, and also the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center that has not been engaged fully in these talks. With that, I would stand for questions an hour later, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before we get to questions, are there any other persons wishing to testify as neutral on the bill? Not saying any, then yeah, we'll open it up for any questions. Any questions? Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I'm trying to get a sense of how big of a problem this is, particularly statewide. Do you have any numbers? I mean, what's the staffing level at our police agencies? Are they really shorthanded?
Very good question. National trend is that the forces are building back. There's less open positions. I can confirm that is also true in Kansas. When I first started as an executive director 3.5 years ago, I started tracking the total number of officers in Kansas. At a low point, it was just over 8,100. Currently, it's just over 8,300. So that would also coincide with what the national rates are. I would not be able to, just like the chief testified to, I would not be able to tell you if this would add 5 people statewide or if it would add 50 people statewide. Speaking to the fiscal note that I offered, our agency is at capacity. We have 6 full-time people at the commission, and since we processed more demographic forms last year than any year in our history. If this adds any weight, I do believe we are going to have at least a half-time position, and we will be absorbing other vendor costs such as additions to our central registry.
Thank you. I think you heard, like we did from one of the proponent conferees from the city of Topeka, that there was an amendment that would change a proposed amendment that would change the age when you became an officer to 21 and provide a provisional license for those who were under 21 and in the program. Is it your testimony that there needs to be some more work on what that looks like?
It would be my opinion that we need to get all stakeholders together and see where that affects other areas of statute and regulation. The devil's in the details, of course. As that amendment was written, we still feel that there are other areas that are going to be compromised in the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Act, but we need more time than just, I saw the amendments on Friday. I couldn't get the commission back together over the weekend, so we need a little more time to sit down with all stakeholders again and really vet this idea, this concept.
We'll appreciate the opportunity and the willingness for discussion and further conversation, and keep that going, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any, then thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate you being here. Is there anyone wishing to testify as an opponent on the bill? Not seeing any, then we will close the hearing on House Bill 2164. And again, thank our conferees for their appearance today and their testimony. We're going to open the hearing on House Bill 2228, requiring the Secretary of Corrections to assist inmates with obtaining identification and employment-related documentation prior to release from custody. And with that, a brief from the reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2228 would create a new section of law. It would require the Secretary of Corrections within 9 months prior to the release of an inmate to determine whether that inmate has the current versions of certain documentation. If the Secretary finds that they don't have a certified copy of a birth certificate, a Social Security card, or a replacement Social Security card, or a driver's license, if they're eligible for one, or an identification card, if they weren't eligible for a driver's license, then the Secretary would be required to make reasonable efforts to provide the inmate with that documentation. If the Secretary finds that the inmate does not have their vocational training record, their work record, any educational certifications or diplomas, or a current resume, then the Secretary would be required to provide the inmate with that documentation. The Secretary would be required to coordinate with state agencies as necessary to gather the documentation for that inmate, and all other state agencies would be required to coordinate with the Secretary on that issue. This new section would not apply to inmates who are going to be released to another jurisdiction on a warrant or a detainer, or to inmates who are determined by the Secretary to be physically or mentally unable to return to the workforce when they're released from custody. And I can take any questions.
Thank you. Committee questions. So is there liability if, since this is a shall, is there liability for the department if it doesn't happen?
Madam Chair, there's no penalty for non-compliance by the Secretary that's built into the statute. I suppose, because it is a requirement, like you said, an inmate would be able to kind of file an action in court to, require the Secretary to comply with the law, but there's no penalty specifically provided for.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Not seeing any, then thank you very much. And we will invite proponent conferee Chris Fanning, Executive Director, Programs and Risk Management, Kansas Department of Corrections. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing the Department of Corrections to share information on reentry and release planning in support of House Bill 2228. I am Dr. Chris Fanning. I am the Executive Director of Programs and Risk Reduction for the Kansas Department of Corrections. You should have received a handout outlining the key components of reentry and release planning, as well as our ongoing initiatives and challenges we are facing. The KDOC supports this bill because it provides a critical bridge for incarcerated individuals reentering society by ensuring that they have necessary identification and employment-related documents before release. Lack of proper identification is a significant barrier to securing housing, employment, and essential services, often leading to recidivism or a return to prison. By requiring the Secretary of Corrections to assist with obtaining these documents, the bill promotes successful reintegration, reduces reliance on public assistance, and enhances public safety. House Bill 2228 concerns reentry and release planning for KDOC residents. Risk reduction, reentry services, and release planning are provided to all residents consistent with their custody level and areas of risk and need, beginning at 16 months pre-release, or if time to serve is less than 16 months, it's begun immediately. The unit team counselor is responsible for developing a release plan along with other members of KDOC staff. It is also important to consider the statistics related to returning citizens, which you may have seen in other presentations, but it does bear repeating. 95% of our residents will return to the community. 33% of our residents serve less than a year. 47% serve less than 2 years, and 66% will serve less than 5 years. Residents serving sentences longer than 5 years are still provided risk reduction and programming. Priority is given to those serving those shorter sentences. You have in front of you a list of key components the KDOC employs in a resident's reentry and release plan. I will focus on just a few that directly relate to House Bill 2228. Program history and progress reports. Some of our residents will also need to plan for continuing those programs upon release. An example might be an individual who struggles with substance use and needs information about some AA or NAA meetings that will be available near their place of residence, and we provide that. Under work history, job skills, and plan for employment after release, this information is actually collected upon arrival and updated through the term of a person's incarceration. There are opportunities to complete career assessments, engage in career readiness programs, and work with a navigator to complete job searches and a resume. However, the access is limited due to space and staffing constraints. And then status of identification, including birth certificate, social security card, and a Kansas driver's license or state ID. This is noted if they have these documents upon arrival to the facility, and a system is established to allow people to obtain these documents prior to release. An initiative started in 2019 with applications being sent through the mail. Today, a resident can attend an on-site clinic inside a correctional facility to obtain that day their driver's license or ID. And I will speak more to that underneath initiatives. Ensuring reentry plans are approved at all levels and reentry meetings between the resident, facility case management staff, and parole case management staff occur 2 weeks prior to release is one of our first initiatives that we are enacting this year. Plans are created by the unit team counselor, then are sent to the unit team manager for approval. The unit team manager then determines if it needs to be reviewed by victim services or by the parole review board. After that, it then goes into the IPO or release planner's hands, and then it will go out to the parole office. These are all the individuals that would be responsible to be participating in that 2-week review prior to a person's release. We are also identifying current components that can be done prior to 16 months, birth certificates, social security cards, purposeful education and employment plans, and career readiness and work and skill development, to name a couple. There will always be components that need to be completed or can only be completed closer to release, transportation plans, program history and progress reports, and financial reconciliation. We are currently restricted to 6 months or 180 days with replacement social security cards. These don't expire, so they could, in theory, be obtained at intake. I'll speak to this further in challenges. We're also going to build upon the success of our driver's license and ID clinics to increase the number of residents releasing with their state ID. Secretary Burkhart and his staff at the Kansas Department of Revenue have gone above and beyond in assisting us with creating, modifying, and implementing successful driver's license and ID clinics beginning with virtual clinics at our Topeka and Lansing facilities in March of 2021. Prior to this, in 2019, we were able to do mail-in only. Full in-person clinics started in 2022, and in fiscal year 2025, we are scheduled to complete 50 on-site clinics at our 1 juvenile and 8 adult facilities. This achievement would be impossible without the Department of Revenue's willingness to be innovative with their services, and are the reason we are able to provide this service in-house inside a correctional facility. Our thanks and appreciation are extended to Secretary Burkhart and his staff. Some of the challenges that we face: timeline restrictions from external entities, specifically Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid applications. I mentioned prior, we are limited to 6 months or 180 days with Social Security replacement cards. And that is kind of a national issue with a lot of other state agencies that I've explored. Medicare and Medicaid applications can only be sent 90 days from release, although this is a less frequent need than those Social Security cards. Methods of ensuring a resident has access to the resume and other job-seeking materials after returning to the community is also one of our greatest challenges. We have difficulties with residents being able to fully engage in job-seeking processes, specifically creating and updating resumes. This needs to be done one-on-one with a career navigator. There are also security issues with word processing programs, making it nearly impossible for a resident to engage in the process on their own. And last but certainly not least, a challenge that we are consistently facing: safe housing options for our most vulnerable residents is a consistent challenge. We do work on residence plans, having a primary and a secondary residence plan for everybody in that release planning, but it is sometimes a little bit difficult. House Bill 2228 benefits not only returning citizens, but also employers, communities, and the overall economy by fostering self-sufficiency and reducing recidivism rates. Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for allowing the Kansas Department of Corrections to speak in support of House Bill 2228, and I will stand for questions as appropriate.
Thank you for your testimony. Thanks for being here. I'm going to ask, are there any other persons wishing to testify as a proponent on the bill? Not seeing any, then we'll go ahead and open it up for any questions. Senator Schmidt and then Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Fanning, one of the things that I've heard a lot in my canvassing in the last few years from formerly incarcerated individuals is the lack of willing employers. And so where I've been working is most recently Shawnee County, but also Wyandotte County, Leavenworth, and elsewhere. Lack of willing employers to consider formerly incarcerated applicants. Is there understanding that as one of the rate limiting steps for the problem that you're trying to solve? Can you address that concern, and if there's any opportunity in this bill to address it?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senator Schmidt, thank you for that question. I'm not sure about opportunities within this bill. Of course, this bill would make it easier for a person to gain employment. And I think definitely in our conversations with potential employers, it would definitely be a benefit to say they will be walking out and they will have all of this information at hand. For the committee, I'd also like to state that we are working directly with employers around the state. We have employer liaisons, and we are always actively seeking employer partners with the Kansas Department of Corrections.
Thank you. Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dr. Fanning, for your presentation. It's quite a list of things that you're planning on having once they get charged or released back to the community. The first question I had in mind is, all these things are great, and I saw the cost was quite high, but my question basically is, what's the policy now?
Madam Chair, Senator, that's a great question. We do have some policies in place that relate directly to reentry and release planning within our department. These are activities that we are already currently doing. However, this legislation would allow us to scale it and make it consistent across the state.
So if I understand, you're saying you do some of these things now.
Correct.
Okay, but now you're going to have a list, so each one you're going to have a list as you go through. So as the inmate is being released, this makes sure all these things are filled out, so, or at least they have it in hand. so it'll be easier for them to get a job or get back into society.
Madam Chair, Senator, yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Argabright.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I very supportive of this. I feel like it's going to take down or at least minimize maybe roadblocks for these individuals getting back involved in their community and with a job. And I do think the fiscal note will take care of itself if we're successful at doing this. I know it will move it in the right direction, or I feel like it will. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Senator.
So I have a question about at the actual implementation of this. It's a lot of shalls. And the first one is the secretary shall identify whether the inmate has current versions. What do you envision that would be? Is that simply asking the inmate?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. We have several different points in time where we work directly with a resident on gathering these certain documents. It all starts when they come through our reception and diagnostic unit, which is coming into the correctional facility and beginning their sentence. During the process, now reentry is a process that is ongoing. Release planning is what happens 16 months prior. So in our reentry process, individuals are consistently working with their counselor, with their unit team, with other reentry staff in order to make sure that these materials are gathered appropriately.
So is this even necessary if we're already doing all this?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question. I believe that it is. Again, I think that this will allow us to have some more consistency across the state and allow us to scale up the processes. Currently, with our driver's license and IT clinics in particular, we're at capacity with being able to offer these around the state with what we're currently doing. So this will allow us to scale that up.
How does the department envision the bill would also require all state agencies shall coordinate with the Secretary of Corrections? What does that look like?
Madam Chair, thank you. I think that we already have evidence of that with Secretary Burkhart and the Kansas Department of Revenue already being fantastic partners with us in that endeavor. We also have a great relationship with the Kansas Department of Commerce and Workforce Development. We have an individual there who works partly for the Department of Corrections and partly for the Department of Commerce on those employment issues related to justice-impacted citizens.
And then you mentioned deadlines regarding Medicaid applications. That's not part of the bill.
Madam Chair, that is correct. I was just using that as an example of some of the challenges that we face with different entities.
And if it costs to get, for instance, a certified copy of a birth certificate, who pays for that?
Madam Chair, that's a great question. The residents themselves will pay for that. If they're unable to do so, we do have indigent funds that will cover that cost.
And regarding the work record of the inmate, what does that mean?
Madam Chair, that is simply not only work that maybe they have done prior to being incarcerated, but also work that they may have completed while they're incarcerated. There are a lot of opportunities to be employed through work release, through private industry, and as well as being employed by the Department of Corrections as porters, tutors, et cetera. So gathering up all of that information and making sure that it's all compiled in a reasonable document.
Does the department already do that?
Madam Chair, yes, to a certain extent we do. However, that does involve, to pull it all together in a solid resume, it does require that one-on-one work with a career navigator, and currently we have one of those at every facility. So it's a different type of process to get all of that pulled together for everybody.
I think the fiscal note indicates about $280,000 for the first 2 years this is implemented. Does that include, I don't have the fiscal note in front of me, but does that include a new full-time or part-time FT, or full-time or part-time employee?
Madam Chair, I do not have the fiscal note in front of me either, but I do believe that it is for FTEs, and I can confirm that.
Right, so we're talking about adding some new employees, and that would be a continuing then expense for the department.
Madam Chair, that is correct.
And how many inmates would this apply to in a year?
Madam Chair, that's a great question, and I don't want to take a guess, so we'll get a better response developed for you. But I will say that for anybody that would be eligible, we would definitely make every effort to ensure that these documents are in place.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, not seeing any. Thank you very much for your testimony and for appearing here today. Appreciate it. Committee, you also have proponent written testimony at your desk from Jennifer Roth, Deputy Appellate Defender, BIDS Legislative Committee, Kansas State Board of Indigence Defense Services, and Rashane Hamby, Director of Policy and Research, American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas. Is there anyone wishing to testify as neutral or opponent on the bill? Not seeing any, then we will close the hearing on House Bill 2228 and thank everyone for their testimony today. Next, we will open the hearing on House Bill 2312, excluding certain offenders convicted of a non-person felony from participation in certified drug abuse treatment programs and authorizing community correctional services officers to complete criminal risk need assessments for divertees who are committed to such programs. And with that, a bill brief from the reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Section 1 of House Bill 2312 amends KSA 216824. This is the statute that creates the Certified Drug Abuse Treatment Program. You commonly hear it referred to as the Senate Bill 123 program. Current law there outlines that certain adult offenders whose current offense is a severity level 7, 8, 9, or 10 on the non-drug grid are eligible to participate in the program. This bill would add that the new provision that excludes those offenders if one of these special sentencing rules apply. And you'll see on the second page of my brief the special rules that are listed here, but the crimes would be deprivation of property, theft, identity theft, and burglary. So if one of those certain special sentencing rules apply, they wouldn't be eligible for participation in the program. Section 2 amends KSA 7552-144. This is the statute that provides the requirements and procedures for implementing the Senate Bill 123 program. Current law there in subsection C provides that the criminal risk need assessment shall be conducted by a court services officer. And this bill would provide that assessment for use pursuant to 216825, which is the Senate Bill 123 program for non-drug offenders for diversion agreements, can be conducted by a court services officer or by a community corrections officer. And I can take any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. We will invite proponent conferee Scott Schultz, Executive Director, Kansas Sentencing Commission, to the podium. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Happy Daylight Savings Day +1. I congratulate all of you that are morning people, and I'm not. My name is Scott Schultz. I'm the Executive Director of the Sentencing Commission. This is a bill that was brought on at the behest of the Commission. It made it through the House. There were no neutrals or opponents on this bill, and it passed out 123 to nothing. As Natalie talked about, this pertains to the Senate Bill 123 program, and this has two parts to it. The program itself, the legislature has been very kind in actually expanding this program 3 times in the last 6 years. And many of you are aware that when you actually promulgate legislation, sometimes you got to tweak it after a couple of years. And so this bill pretty much covers that in two particular parts. The first part is that we receive concerns from practitioners about some of the felony sentencing that goes on in the state. One of these addressed the Senate Bill 123 plus which actually takes care of the non-drug portion of the eligibility for the 123 program. And in that situation, the problem was there really wasn't any backstop in terms of how many times you can actually take Senate Bill 123. And keep in mind, again, the 123 is an 18-month probation. You're serving it in the community. You're not going to prison. And it's actually came into being clear back in 2003 for that specific purpose of treating individuals for substance abuse so that they wouldn't go to prison. With 123 plus, there is really no backstop, and so this aims to actually solve that problem by limiting eligibility with these particular special rules. Now, the special sentencing rules are those if you fall into those particular niche situations of your sentencing, or you have a prior, for example, it's presumptive prison, then you actually will not be eligible for Senate Bill 123 plus. And so the commission thought it was very important to be able to, as we do in the on the drug possession side, there is a backstop. A third time conviction of possession actually is presumptive prison, and you're not eligible for 123. To do that same thing with the non-drug with SB 123 plus. And so again, mainly a cleanup type of bill to satisfy so that individuals can't continuously go and receive treatment. There has to be an end point. The final point that I would make on the second item is the recovery from addiction-funded treatment, or the RAFT program, that prosecutors enter into with either community corrections or court services at this time for diversion. We pay for that substance abuse treatment while they're on diversion. This was done back in 2021 when the RAFT program was passed by the legislature. The simple language here is it allows community corrections to do assessments that are required for that particular purpose. Currently, the statute only reads that court services can do that. However, the statute is clear that both can actually supervise individuals while they're on diversion. And so with that, again, this was, I do have in my testimony those special rules in Attachment 1 that would apply in this instance. Attachment 2 is those that, as far as the frequency is concerned. But again, thank you on behalf of the Commission for considering this, and be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Before we open it up for any questions, are there any other persons wishing to testify as proponent on the bill? Not seeing any, then we'll go ahead and open it up for any questions. Not seeing any of those either, so you're it's an easy day for you, at least here in committee. So thank you very much for coming over and for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any persons wishing to testify as neutral or opponent on the bill? Not seeing any, then we will go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2312. Committee, before we have possible final action, let's take a look at the meeting minutes from February 17th, February 26th, and 27th of 2025. Is there any discussion or a motion? Senator Rose.
I move that we approve of the meeting minutes.
Thank you. Is there a second? Senator Bowser. So you all have heard the motion. Is there any discussion? Not seeing anything. You want to go ahead and close?
I close, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Then you all have heard the motion to approve the minutes from February 16th, 26th, and 27th, and 2025. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion carries. Thank you. Next, I'd like to consider final action on House Bill 2061. And 2061 concerned critical infrastructure. If we'll get a brief summary from the reviser. We heard this bill on February 26th.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 2061 would include above ground and below ground lines, cables, and wires, and the definition of a critical infrastructure facility used for telecommunications or video services. So that way it would be included in those crimes of criminal trespassing on critical infrastructure facility and also criminal damage to a critical infrastructure facility.
Thank you. And who was that brought to the legislature by?
Madam Chair, it looks like it was requested for introduction by Fred Patton on behalf of Charter Communications Operating LLC.
Thank you. And the vote in the House was 104 to 14. So any questions for the reviser? Not seeing any, then any discussion? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment if the reviser could pass that out.
Sure, and we'll wait a moment while she passes that out. Did you want to explain your amendment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will explain. If you'll notice the changes on page 2, this is the section that we had most of the testimony on. I asked a number of questions trying to understand how all this fit together. I had concerns about the definition of facility, how this section seemed a little bit unlike some of the other sections, and also had questions about the inclusion of the right-of-way language and how that would be clearly defined. So what I've done with this section is I've clearly called out when it comes to, I think we all agree that communication infrastructure needs to be protected, but this sort of calls out facilities, anything that's related to the facilities, but it also has those above ground or below ground lines, and it's not tied into that facility definition. It also removes the right-of-way language. So the intent of this is to protect those lines, but without getting into all the weird confusion about if I have a line in my front yard, is that a protected facility? So the intent is just to still give the protection, but sort of make the language a little less clunky. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. When you said it removes the right-of-way language, that's not the amendment that's in the bill, right? The removing, whether it's in the highway right-of-way or not? That's already been removed? No.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The strike in lines 28 and 32 is new striked in the amendment. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and does that take us back to the bill as introduced?
Madam Chair, the changes that were made by the House committee are actually adding subparagraphs D and E there in the bold language. So as introduced, it had the whether that facility is located within or outside of public or highway right-of-way. So this would remove that, kind of do a version of that language up after facility in line 27, and then it would retain the House committee amendments.
Thank you. And we did discuss, well, that's kind of not really adding anything to the bill, the whether such facility is located in or out. And does this then address your concern about if you're stopped on the side of the road in the highway right-of-way and you're standing on critical infrastructure that's below ground and it's a cable or wire line?
Correct. I think it removes any confusion about that.
So you would be trespassing at that point, or you wouldn't?
You would not be unless you dug up and damaged the cable.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, other questions? Not seeing any. Do we have a second? Senator Clays. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Did you want to close?
I close.
Thank you. Committee, you all have heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion carries. We're back on the bill as amended. Any further discussion or amendments? Not seeing any. Is there a motion? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move the committee recommend House Bill 2061 as amended favorably for passage.
Thank you. Is there a second? Senator Rose. Any discussion? Not seeing any, then you want to close, Senator Titus? Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion carries. Committee also, with the time remaining, wanted to have an opportunity to look at House Concurrent Resolution 5008. We heard this on March 6th, and it passed the House 86 to 37. And with that, a brief summary from the reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Concurrent Resolution 5008 would propose a constitutional amendment to provide that the legislature would be able to revoke or revise rules and regulations that are adopted by the executive branch agencies and officials.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for the reviser? Any discussion? Not seeing any, then is there a motion? Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the committee recommend HCR 5008 favorably for passage.
Thank you. And second from Senator Clays. Is there any discussion? Not seeing any. Senator Titus, you want to close?
I close.
Thank you. You all have heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion appears to carry. The motion does carry. Does anyone want to be recorded as a no? Senator Schmidt will be recorded as a no. With that then, committee, we do continue to have a busy week ahead of us, so please make sure you get any proposed amendments ready and possible final action on the bills we've previously heard. So with that, thank you everyone for your work today, including our staff, and for the audience we have in our committee as well. I think we'll be seeing you later today, probably on the Senate floor, for a more formal introduction, but thank you for participating in by observing our Senate Judiciary Committee today. Appreciate it. So thank you very much, everyone. And with that then, the meeting is adjourned.